2014 work session of the Board of Trustees of the Village of Ossining. Please join me for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. A few announcements before we get underway. This Sunday at 1 o'clock, the Jug Tavern of Sparta is having a tour of the historic Sparta neighborhood, starting at the Jug Tavern, which is on the corner of Rockledge Avenue and Revolutionary Road. You will walk around for a couple of hours. It'll start with a new documentary on the historic neighborhood, and then you walk around and end up having seen quite a number of houses. There are about 38 historic houses in that section of the town. So it's a lot of fun. So the tour is free, but you need to make reservations. So if you go on to info@jugtavern.org, you can make the reservations. On Saturday the 15th, which is next week, the Westchester County Shredder is coming to the Village of Ossining. It'll be at the Community Center. So residents are encouraged to bring up to 4 cardboard boxes of file box size. Please, only personal papers, no business papers, no newspapers, only personal papers that you're concerned might give away some family information. So if you have bills from a credit card company or a mortgage you've burned or something that you might want to get rid of, have it shredded by the county. So please take out the, I'm sorry?
A mother-in-law or
A
something.
mother-in-law, a paper mother-in-law. What is that, a ba-dum-bum for his mother-in-law?
Exactly.
So maximum of 4 file boxes, no clips, no staples, nothing metal. Also on that Saturday, the 15th at 11 a.m. till 5 p.m., you can find out if you are eligible to buy an affordable house, an affordable home in Westchester County. There is a fair and affordable housing expo at Westchester County Center, which is 198 Central Avenue. It's on 119 and the corner of Central Avenue. Admission is free, and they will have lenders who can describe available loans, realtors with the most affordable listings, not-for-profit counselors to guide you through the home ownership process. So for more information, call the Housing Action Council at 332-4144, HAC@affordablehomes.org, or the Westchester Residential Opportunities, 428-4507, extension 314, G. Anderson at WROinc.org. The deadline for new gardeners to register for the Ossining Organic Community Garden plots located on Cedar Lane Park will be again on March 15th. Please contact the Ossining Recreation Department 941-3189 to be added to the wait list or for more information. There are occasionally some plots that become available, but they have been full in previous years. So first come, first serve. There's a new committee that we are starting up. The village is looking for residents, 2 residents and 3 people from the business community to serve on a downtown events committee. The mission of the committee will be to promote the image of downtown Ossining as a lively, safe, and vibrant community, a place that local residents and visitors alike can enjoy. The committee will be dedicated to managing, promoting, obtaining sponsorship for, and executing special events and activities in Market Square. If you're interested, please send a letter of interest and a resume to Ingrid Richards Manager of Downtown and Economic Development at 16 Croton Avenue, Ossining, New York, 10562, or you can reach her on email, irichards@villageofossining.org, by Wednesday, April 16th. Anyone else?
Yes, I wanted to remind everyone the temperature is warming up, but that doesn't mean that your home is any more energy efficient than it was 2 months ago when you were really, really cold, or 2 nights ago when you were really, really cold. So I encourage you to go to energizeossining.org and find out how you can get an energy efficiency upgrade for your home. And with the funding available and the programs available through New York State, it may cost you no out-of-pocket money, and it will just make your home more comfortable, more energy efficient. It will cost you less money and make your home more valuable. And if you would like, if this is airing before Thursday morning, the 13th of March, then join me at the library from 9:30 to 11. I'll be helping to man or woman a table at the Ossining Public Library, and we'll be able to walk you through the application process. If you bring your Con Edison bill, we could really get your whole application done for you right there at the library Thursday morning with library assistance hours for Energize. Also at the library, next Thursday, March 20th, is the March Installa screening for the Ossining Documentary and Discussion Series. This month's selection is called Vegucated. The tagline kind of tells you what it is. It's 3 people, 6 weeks, 1 challenge. They asked 3 people who like to eat meat and like to eat dairy to eat a vegan diet, a plant-based diet for 6 weeks, and find out what their experience was like. It challenges us to think about our own food choices and how our food is sourced and the choices that we're making, and I hope that you will join us for that discussion. It's really a wonderful series, and I was just thinking today, we started this series last June, and I brought the idea to some community members to create a forum where residents in the community could come together and talk about issues that were important to us. And the first movie we screened was Queen of the Sun. And we talked about beekeeping. And some of the people who are here tonight to talk about the proposed beekeeping legislation that we're going to discuss among the board members were there that night, and it was a wonderful opportunity for all of us to start learning more. Anyway, some of us had started quite some time ago, Lori Lee, learning about beekeeping and how that could possibly work in a community like ours. So kind of feel like it's finally coming around again, and I'm looking forward to that discussion later tonight.
Lori Lee, are you going to read that file into the record?
Yeah.
No.
Questions from the audience.
Anyone else? Okay.
Thank you. We have a number of interesting items on the agenda this evening. The first item is further discussion on beekeeping legislation. The Village of Ossining has been talking at the board level as well as at the committee level about the possibility of enacting beekeeping legislation which would allow residents to maintain a beehive in their yard and all the other benefits that come along with that. There was a committee that was formed by the village board that has been investigating it, and out of that came some proposed legislation. The committee regrouped, and most recently I think we went on a field trip where we had an opportunity to visit a couple of different yards and places within the village that might be sort of typical of a village lot in residential lot in the village, and just to see how it might work in a different particular setting. We visited 3 different venues, and I have to say it was extremely interesting. And I personally learned a lot, so I thought it was a good endeavor. And so at this point, I thank everyone who's come in this evening to speak with us. I'll turn it over to Trustee Garrity, and she can introduce our guests and proceed with the presentation.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Bob Durayo and I serve, we represent the board on the subcommittee that was looking into this. But we weren't actually the first members of the subcommittee. It started before I was even on the village board. And when we came to the village board, the legislation was considering an approach that focused primarily on certain setbacks, like a certain number of feet from the property line that it would be appropriate to have a hive. And that's there was that's legislation that exists in other communities, and it makes a lot of sense in those communities. And it would allow for beekeeping on large properties in the village. For example, where there's a community garden at Mariondale was one place that had expressed interest in beekeeping, and they were very interested, and we want it. Lots of legislation would have permitted them to have beekeeping, but it might not have been possible for lots in the village to keep bees, at least not in the smartest, safest manner. So we started looking into what are some different kinds of legislation. We reached out to beekeepers in the area for some advice, and I spoke with a gentleman, John Bernard, who is a former New York State apiary inspector, and he actually attended our screening in June. And then I followed up with him by phone last fall to get some advice from him, and he suggested you should really look at New York City's approach, because that's clearly a very densely populated community, and they have beekeeping, and it's going very well. And so when we took our field trip, Dan Carr from Stone Barns helped guide our field trip, and Rob Lowenthal, who's a beekeeper in the town of Ossining, where it is permitted. It's I should clarify, it's prohibited in the village of Ossining right now, beekeeping. And so when we took our field trip, we looked at 3 different properties. One of them was a lot surrounded on 3 sides by properties with an enclosed backyard. One of them was a corner lot that happens to be my house, so it has exposure on 2 sides to public sidewalks. And then one of them was a house with a very large front yard. So we looked at 3 different configurations. And at each house, we asked Dan and Rob to tell us, if you were advising a new beekeeper on how to place a hive in their property, what would make sense? And we came to realize that with some setback allowances, if we'd used that approach, you might have been able to place a beehive in somebody's backyard who has houses on 3 sides, but you'd be placing it in a location that made no sense for the bees and did not discourage. It would have been very difficult to discourage the bees from, or to guide their path in a safe manner. So if we instead looked at what would you recommend, what makes sense, we were able to find different locations in each property that were unique to that property and were safer for the community because the bees, and I'll let Dan get into the safety of bees because I'm not a beekeeper, but where it made more sense. For example, I'll just talk about one property where it had a very large front yard, but it has a little garage near the front yard. And in some beekeeping legislations in some communities, they do not allow any hives in front yards. That's just the regulation, and it seems logical to a lot of us. But we looked at this property as an example, and there was a little garage, and behind the garage was a little stream, and there was a little nook behind the garage, which was several feet from the road, but not 30 feet from the road. And if you put a hive here, and you just had a little, I think you advised there would be some sort of flight barrier over here, it would be an ideal place for bees, and the bees would be very unlikely to travel in any great numbers to where the public might be walking or to the neighbor's house. So those are the kind of things that we looked at any given property. And then Lori Lee spent, I know, a lot of time looking at legislation in various communities and finding out what has been the experience in other communities, and really came up with a whole new approach that works, that adapts our code in the village. And I don't know if we want to speak on the legalities of it, or if the village board is more interested in hearing from beekeepers about what you would. Dan, would you mind? Can I invite Dan to get up and speak?
Yeah, I think we do need to hear the legalities as well to
Good.
describe what this legislation is before we hear from the beekeepers.
Okay.
I can summarize. I thought, based upon the consensus of the board, to have more of a registration-based ordinance, that being the New York City model, which is the model that was most recently enacted, and a model that was inserts the need for registration of hives within the boroughs of New York City in the health code. So it's a registration with the health commissioner. So I thought the best place for us to adapt a registration-based ordinance would be to include it in the animals ordinance. As you know, up until a number of years ago, you had to register your dogs. You had to license your dog within the village. Now, of course, that process has been taken over by the state. You license your dog through the state. So no longer do you have to do that, but I thought this is logically the same way you would go about registering an apiary, would be to register it with the village so the village is aware of the location and the number of hives, and the property owner and the responsible beekeeper, and also provide that registration on an annual basis. So if need be, we could provide that information to the state. I know the state also requires, New York City legislation requires also that you register with the state. So it allows for the information to flow freely through the village to the state in terms of keeping track of the hives, and that's for purposes of tracking the diseases, the common diseases that seem to follow the poor bees in this current environment. So I have drafted and provided to you for your review a revision to Chapter 75, which is your animals provision. And what it does is it defines the terms apiary, bee, beekeeper, beekeeping, bee colony, in a way that it moves forward with what the requirements for the beekeeping, and that requirement is for the annual registration. And also, if much like the New York City ordinance, if you make changes to your registration, if you should lose a hive for any number of reasons, or if you need to move the apiary to a more amenable location, as we were shown, perhaps the hive isn't thriving in this location, so you move the apiary and put it in this location. So that would need to be re-registered or just updated. So I am working on registration forms. I've been doing that over the last few days since I finalized this. So we should have a complete package in the next 2 weeks or so for you to see. But I thought to get the conversation started, I would let you see what I envision the ordinance to be, and that being registration-based. And also, this is a better place for it because we're not authorizing the use of property. What we're doing is permitting beekeeping in the village by way of registering that hobby, as it were. It isn't a use of the property like you would zone a use. It isn't a use that you would typically find. It's not an appropriate place, in my opinion, to have it in zoning because it doesn't require setbacks that are hard and fast. It doesn't require particular kinds of structures that are hard and fast. I know that the sort of term of art has been these Langstroth hives, but I also know, and based upon the meeting that the beekeepers had just this weekend, that the top bar hive is now becoming very popular. So we don't want to legislate the kind of hive that the beekeepers will be using. We want that to be able to flow to best practices, since in this ordinance, really the most important part of this ordinance is the bee. I mean, to make sure the bee is thriving and also to protect the bees from the common ailments that are occurring, that being, the die-off. And we wanted to encourage the hobby to thrive in the village. So that was the tact I took. You'll see how I've done the defining. I've used definitions from various other sources. I've tried to distill it into a location. And I've minimized the amount of legislation. It's more of a self-regulating community. It isn't a hobby that's taken lightly. It isn't a hobby that's taken cheaply. It is something that people are passionate about, and they want what's best for their bee colonies. So that's the approach this takes. It certainly can be tweaked, and I can take suggestions and we can move some things around. The other thing, your animals ordinance already defined what constituted a nuisance for domestic pets. The housing of pets in a way that was not conducive to their life, their necessities. So we then included a section on nuisances, and this, of course, mirrors some of the language from the New York City ordinance. The New York City ordinance defines what would constitute a nuisance, and I took some of that language, I adapted it again through some of the other research that had been done, and I tried to put that in. It's almost like those rebuttable presumptions that we were talking about last week when we were talking about the housing situation. So it's that kind of thing, and this allows the property owners and the apiary owners then to really do what's in the best interest of the bee colony, and I think
Right.
that that really is the thrust of what we're trying to do here. So
It seems very well done.
where I'm sure it could use some tweaking and some language change and some additional definitions, and
I don't understand why they call it an apiary, because it makes you think there might be
there's
apes.
No, they're not.
But, and we're not really hoping for apes, we're hoping for bees.
That's right.
I have one question which affects two sections of it.
Okay,
You speak in 75.3 requirements of beekeeping.
yes.
Of requiring to be educated in and strictly adhere to.
Mm-hmm.
And then in D, it says, oh no, I'm sorry. Is it, no, somewhere else, it required accreditation. There was a mention of accreditation. But there is no definition of what organization, what kind
Sure.
of organization.
What we would like to do, along with, and part of the registration package will include information available to the proposed beekeepers in the village. In other words, we'll have a best practices, as that term of art is defined in the industry, and make information available. We'll also be making information available to the logical place a person might call to make inquiry, the dispatch desk at the police. If in the unlikely event of a swarm, something is causing disturbance in the hive, and if they should leave, if the bee should leave the hive to light on a branch, we want to be able to call the 3 or 4 people who will come the quickest to help relocate and house the bees again to save that colony from flight. So there isn't a recognized certification of all beekeepers, although there is master beekeeping courses that you can take. And what we would like to see is having this be sort of a living and breathing ordinance, much like the bees themselves, where the rules and regulations that you can promulgate and have available, and each year the beekeeper will certify that they've received the most current version of your rules and regulations. That will encourage education. But if at some time down the road, if the state requires a particular course of study or a particular accreditation of some kind, you want to make sure that you've provided in your ordinance for that to naturally flow to your rules and regulations.
So I think what needs to be in here is some reference to not specific accredited organizations, but the fact that they can be found, recommendations can be found in the packet of information
Okay.
from the village, and that packet can change, as can the requirement of the state
Okay.
somehow get worded in there should there be such a thing.
Sure.
Yeah, you can have, the list of places you can learn to be a beekeeper includes, but is not limited to, and then here's
Right.
You don't want
And-
that in the law. You
No.
want
Yeah,
that
that'll
in
that'll
the
be in the
information
registration
in the
packet.
registration, but you
Yes.
just, in the law, you say that the village will provide in the registration form
Correct.
resources for prospective beekeepers.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that what we're referring to is the 75.3 is the registration section. So it would be part of the registration process, would be, would be provided in that. I don't know if there's particular language that you wanted to include, or you think Lori
No,
could just...
Lori should.
She can identify
Also, appropriate flight barrier,
That comes in.
We want it to be broad because
but you also want to refer to the packet of information that
Correct.
goes along with the registration
Right.
in here.
Right. We're going to ask that the registration include someone, if if you're new to the hobby, we want to make sure that it includes the opportunity for you to give credit to the individual who is mentoring you. So, you know, what is appropriate for Hive 1 is different than what may be appropriate for Hive 2, given, as Victoria was explaining, the constraints of the property themselves. In some cases, an existing hedge might be an appropriate flight barrier, and that will be part of the registration package. You will be asked to describe where your flight barrier is vis-a-vis the opening to your apiary, and then, you know, so what's appropriate in each circumstance will be very much an individual thing. Yeah. So I tried to define that sort of broadly.
Very happy.
I do have a question, Laura Lee.
Okay.
And thank you for the subcommittee. The great work. I think we're like 99.9 there, if anything.
It's up to this conversation.
It's on its
tonight.
way.
I mean, it seems like we have pretty much everything ready if we decided to pass or not.
Yeah, I
I-
hope to have the registration package ready so you can see
Yeah.
the whole thing.
So going back a little bit, and I'm talking about maybe a year and a half ago, how we ended up having this brought to our tables, just to give a little bit of background
Sure.
to the people out there that is watching, that's going to be watching, and for some
Sure.
of them that are attending here. So if you could just give us a little bit of background, I'm sure residents here in the village of Austin would like to bring ideas. I don't want to say similar to this, but ideas that could be passed as a legislation that will work on it, so they can see the work that we do and what we got, what we're here for, pretty much.
Right.
So, please.
I mean, there are sort of the standard legislations throughout the country. There are, this has always been sort of, as Victoria explained, a zoning kind of ordinance. And
Go back.
No, I think
Before.
before that, who brought this idea up to us?
And why?
Who was?
There
and
wasn't a
why?
bunch of trustees in a room who
No,
said,
no,
we need
exactly.
bees.
no,
Exactly. Yes.
actually,
That's
I
what
was
meant.
I was
Sorry.
actually contacted by two beekeepers who were interested in assisting the sisters at Mariondale with putting beekeeping on their property.
That's what you're talking about.
And the sisters had expressed some interest, and they approached some hobbyists who did not have hives in the village, but had hives elsewhere. They contacted me, and I looked through our code, and I saw our fallback provision, which was what was not expressly permitted, is expressly prohibited. So with that prohibition in place, I couldn't offer them the ability to place those hives, even though everyone, I think, in this room was in agreement that it was the perfect place to have hives there.
Right.
There
Which
were
is-
gardens, there were, there's plenty of foraging area, it's wide open space, it's a very appropriate property.
And
So
this research began.
that started the research. We did look at some smaller lots of other communities. We went to Sleepy Hollow, we went down to Irvington, we went to some larger properties to see beekeeping operations or hobbies in these other communities.
The
And we
Grange.
tried to see if we could mirror some legislation. So we took the approach that we would add this as a permitted use, and we then approached it from the zoning code. We took that on for a number of years, and we realized what we were trying to do was to legislate a hobby that we had little knowledge of. We wanted to be sure what was best for this hobby was best for the bee. So we thought, let's back up, let's take a look at it again, and then with Victoria's suggestion, we brought Dan in to do some site visits on properties that wouldn't have been available under the zoning approach.
Right.
So when we looked at it logically and we pulled back, I thought it best to put it in the animals section because that's more of a registration rather than a legislation and zoning and forcing it into a square box when perhaps it didn't need a square box at all.
Exactly.
So
The other
that's
thing-
how we wandered down the path, and that's how we got to where we are this evening.
But there's a reason we started this. It wasn't just because some of the folks at Mariondale thought beehives would be nice.
No,
Worldwide, there's a bee blight. The bees are dying all over the world. Without the bees to pollinate the flowers, we don't get to have food. I'm a big proponent of food. It's one of my favorite things. There are already places, for example, there are no naturally pollinated bananas in the world anymore. It has to be done manually by people because there are no bees in the places where bananas grow. They're all dead. The almond crops are suffering because there's no bees to pollinate them. Certain types of foods will simply cease to exist and be available if this blight is allowed to continue. And the only way to stop it is to replace those bees that are dying off with new bees in new places. And it is vital to the health of the world's food supply that little municipalities like Ossining contribute this kind of legislation to allow people to have beehives so that the food supply and the flowers that you like to smell and pick will be available for our children and our children's children. The Native Americans that were here before us, their elders, their leadership used to say that all decisions needed to be looked at down through 7 generations of impact. We need to start doing that again. This is a first step in that direction.
Thank you. Lori Lee,
Yes.
there seem to be more and more communities that are adopting bee legislation, allowing bees. In Westchester, are there a significant number?
No. We're sort of on the cutting edge of this particular issue, and we're following the lead from the 5 boroughs in New York City. Up to last year, it was against the law to have any venomous insects of any kind in the 5 boroughs. So now there's a specific carve-out for the common species that we're limiting this beekeeping to, and they have found the registration approach to be the most effective way to encourage this. And beekeeping is happening in small lots, in community gardens, in the boroughs, on rooftops, throughout. So we're basing it upon that. And I think there are some other communities who are looking at the issue, but I don't know that they've gotten this far down the path, at least not that I'm aware of.
I like the idea that you've spelled out which variety of bee
Yes,
is
just the one.
appropriate so that there'd never be any
That's true.
question about that. I think that's
Yeah.
very important.
You don't want to bring in a colony of yellow jackets.
No.
You're not going to get any honey, and it's just
No.
going to be annoying.
Yeah.
And
Really.
they find their way anyway.
Yes, they do.
We do have a room filled with
Yes.
lots of
So
experts.
let's
Would it
start.
be all right if we invited Dan up to the microphone? He was very helpful in our journey here and learning.
Well, first of all, I would.
The mic is for the camera
Yeah.
more
We
than
can hear
for
Oh,
us.
okay.
Yeah, we
Good.
can
You
hear
can
you.
hear me. First of all, I just want to thank you all for taking this up. Trustee
Bob.
Durina? Yeah, Bob just pointed out it's vitally essential to our food system. 80% of our food crops are pollinated by honeybees at this point. Basically, I'm a livestock farmer, and I've been working in agriculture my whole life, and I've seen our agriculture system is completely dependent on honeybees at this point. A crop, actually, bringing up almonds is a good example. At this point, they're 100% pollinated by honeybees. Where the almonds mostly grow in California, it's no other pollinators can really survive there. So when honeybees cease to exist, almonds cease to exist, and along with a lot of other things like cherries, cranberries, blueberries. I don't know if anybody saw the pictures of the Whole Foods when they took out all the honeybee pollinated food. It looked pretty barren. And as a livestock farmer, a lot of my pasture crops, clover, alfalfa, are dependent on honeybees as well. So, and one thing I really wanted to point out, why I think it's important that you're taking this up in an urban area, because Ossining really is an urban area. You're really on top of each other here, or a lot of folks are living in close proximity. The vast majority of our honeybees at this point are only on farmland, and so they're exposed to tremendous amounts of pesticides, fungicides, all sorts of different chemicals. And what scientists are really figuring out now, a lot of this colony collapse disorder that we're learning about, what's really happening is these different chemicals are coming back from our agricultural crops, and they're synergizing. A lot of them are fat soluble, so it builds up in our wax. So fungicides synergize with pesticides or herbicides, and so we're getting these deadly compounds that are really decimating our bees. That's why it's essential to have backyard beekeepers. I think the backyard beekeepers are really what's going to save beekeeping. And actually, Dr. Tim Leslie from Long Island University in Brooklyn is right now doing a study that I'm helping him with, and a lot of other beekeepers in Westchester and elsewhere, and in New York City are helping him with, where we're sending him pollen samples and wax samples so he can test it for pesticides. And his hypothesis is that the urban bees are the ones that are having the least amount of chemicals in them. Surprising, the bees in New York City might have less chemicals than the ones in Dutchess County or Columbia County or elsewhere, but that's turning out to be the way it is. And another thing I'd like to point out is, the vast majority of our colonies, I guess in the U.S. right now we have close to 2 million bees. About 1.5 million of those bees are migratory beekeepers. Actually, right now at this present time, about 1.5 million of those are in California at the almond pollination. So they're all out there picking up all of the bees are in one close proximity right now. A lot of diseases are being spread right now. A lot of pesticides are being brought back into the hives by the bees. So having backyard beekeepers like the folks that are here, and really supporting that in your own village would set a fantastic precedent for the community. So I'm sure you have lots of beekeeping questions. If there is any, I would love to answer any that you might have.
Well, I don't have any beekeeping questions because I have no intention of keeping bees. I have a small piece of property with a big stone house. They're going to,
Yeah.
But I am concerned. We've been getting emails a lot. And there are people who are very concerned about bee stings and swarms and whatever. Do you want to address that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I was lucky to have a chance to take a look at the great work that Lori Lee did beforehand. And some of the things that she included really address that. I think the three major issues where you're going to run into public that doesn't want to interact with bees, interacting with bees, are when they're foraging, which actually, in all honesty, that's when they're the most docile. You're never going to get stung by a bee that's going out to collect nectar or pollen. In fact, their bellies are full of nectar. They're not going to sting you. But we don't want people getting frightened by bees, flying by them. So the fact that she put in a flight barrier really gets us around that. If you have any sort of flight barrier that's at least 6 feet high around your hives, especially in front of the entrance, that'll get them up and above where most people are. So I really appreciate her adding that. Another instance where people run into bees is around water. Bees need a source of water like all animals. So let's say your neighbor has a swimming pool. Maybe the bees might be going to get water there. So I really love that she included having a water source near the bees. And sometimes your bees will decide, I like that chlorinated water better than the water you put out for me. And that's tell all beekeepers, if they run into that problem, all you got to do is go and ask the folks if you can collect a little of their pool water and put it a little closer to the hive. The bees will always want to go closer to a water source that's closer, even if they develop a different taste for different water. And the last instance where people might run into bees would be in swarming occasions. And actually, that is when bees are absolutely the most docile. Just to revise what Ms. Dixon was saying about swarming, it's not because of something that's gone wrong in the hive. Actually, swarming is a symptom of a very healthy hive. When a hive's thriving, when it's doing very, very well, the queen says, basically, I'm anthropomorphizing them a little bit, but basically they say, we're strong enough, we're going to split. So the queen will actually lay an egg in a queen cell and start making a new queen. The old queen will take off with about 40% of the hive, and when they're swarming, what they're doing is they're clustering to protect the queen while they're sending out scouts.
To find a new hive.
To find a new place, yeah. While they're doing that, they plan to be there for 3-4 days. So they, like I said before, they'll fill their bellies with nectar before they take off. I love catching swarms because it makes me look like this expert bee wrangler, because I don't need to wear a veil, I don't need to wear gloves. I'll just go and I'll scoop them with my hands. Anytime you see a bee beard, they're in swarm mode. Somebody has a queen on their neck or queen pheromone on their neck, they're not going to sting you in that state. Mm-hmm. But it's scary for people to see, and I've seen it in New York City. It can freak people out. So I think it would be essential to have a list of people who can come and get them. Beekeepers love to catch swarms. It's freebies. It's something that we all hope for. Actually, we kind of hope to catch swarms, but also the fact that you're really encouraging beekeepers to educate themselves before they take on this venture. That's how you prevent swarming. No beekeeper wants their own bees to swarm. You're losing your hives. You're losing some honey production. You're losing money.
Thank you. I hope that addresses the concerns that people have been emailing to us. And speaking in person, you walk down Main Street and people will stop you to talk about this.
Yeah. Well, and the main reason why I'm really happy you're bringing this up, because it gets this conversation going. And if we can just show everybody the difference between a yellow jacket and a honeybee, that would do a lot, because most people that are afraid of bees or fear being stung, they've been stung by yellow jackets and are confused. Honeybees rarely sting. They're only when you're invading the hive. So they'll sting me because I invade their hive every day. But they're not going to sting my neighbors most of the time.
Dan, along the lines of what you started talking about, and let me just reiterate for anybody who wasn't here at the beginning, Dan works at Stone Barns. He's the beekeeper there. And so we reached out to him on Rob's recommendation as somebody who would be happy to help us learn about beekeeping in the area. A lot of us are probably share the concerns that you and Bob were talking about the need for us to support healthy bees and backyard beekeepers, but may not want to take on a hive ourselves. And you and I had talked about, I just wanted to let the public know, and maybe you can just speak for a moment about the potential of you and another colleague offering for the public beyond these meetings an opportunity for people to learn about native pollinators and how community members can be supportive of that.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I always say bees are a great gateway drug to just being a naturalist in general. I never looked at the blossom dates before, but now I'm looking at everything that's blossoming and wondering if my bees are on it. And then I'm seeing other bees, wondering what those bees are. So we have a fantastic resident expert at Stone Barns on pollinator gardens and native bees. And when I told her about what you all are doing here, she was really excited about the opportunity that maybe we could co-teach something at your library here, or do some outreach for you here about not just honeybees, but all of our native pollinators, and how, you know, everybody that wants to support all pollinators, what they can do in their own backyard, even if they don't want to keep bees. So she's a horticulturalist, and she can talk about all the best things to plant for not just honeybees, but butterflies, blue orchard bees, bumblebees, carpenter bees, everything that we need to, you know, keep producing food.
Cool.
Thank you, Dan. Is there anyone else who wants to speak?
I actually had a question. I noticed in some of the ordinances that I was reviewing that they had some recommendations about fire safety. And I know that often you see that in movies and such, that they use smoke to make the bees docile so they can remove honeycomb and that kind of thing. Can you talk a little bit about what the standard would be in terms of and then I know at the beekeepers meeting they had a demonstration about
Keeping your smoker lit.
the smokers, yeah.
Yeah, which
So
is usually a bigger problem.
could you talk a little bit about that? Because there may be some misconception about what the smoke is for, how dangerous it might be, you know,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Well, I think that's actually a valid concern, and one thing one thing I encourage all beekeepers that are getting started out with is to have a box, a fire safe box to be able to put your smoker in afterwards. But that's, you know, a beekeeper doesn't want their smoker to get too hot. You never want to singe your bees. So basically, what I do is get a smoker hot enough that it'll keep the embers will keep burning on the bottom, but we'll cool it by adding more material on top. So I never get a very hot smoker where I got flames coming out or anything like that. But the easiest thing that I don't know. I'm actually a member of the volunteer fire department in Pecanico Hills, and so I'm very conscious of that as well. So to make sure as a beekeeper you have a place you can put your smoker to make sure it cools completely.
Would that be an appropriate thing to add to the best practices, rules and regulations that we may be handing out with our registration?
I would say no, just because everybody's circumstance is different.
Okay.
But I
So
think
maybe
it's
to point out that they need to pay attention to that aspect of the beekeeping.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I think that's something to be conscious of. I've never actually. I honestly, I hear more about beekeepers having a hard time keeping their smoker lit than ever. I've never heard of a fire and I'm from Colorado and Montana, so we're from the drier parts of the country, and I don't hear of that instance.
Good.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you. Let's move on. Well done, Lori. Super. It's super, Lori. Excellent work. Thank you, and thank you for help.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dan, thanks for joining us this evening. We really appreciate your input and all the things that you taught us most recently. So nice to see you again. Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is sort of an update on the proposal for the Spring Street two-way under the comprehensive plan. And I think it's been long thought of that it might be a good opportunity if Spring Street, which is currently one way at its intersection with Main Street, be changed so that it could be a two-way street from Main Street to the point where it actually becomes a two-way at this point, which I believe is St. Paul's Place. It's believed that this will really help the businesses in that area, and that it'll be a boon to a lot of new businesses that will open on that street. So we had a conceptual proposal, and a gentleman came in and provided the schematic of what could be done at that time. We're now moving into the next phase, and we're looking to put a resolution on for the board to authorize the execution of a contract that will actually give the engineering details, which would be in connection with the pilot program. The pilot program is a program where Spring Street would be turned two ways, and we're anticipating that it would be done. Current schedule is on or about May 1st, something like that. And we figure a pilot of 3 to 6 months will give an opportunity for it to be evaluated. This contract provides for several different phases. The first phase would be the actual preparation of the schematics and the design in order to go ahead Our engineer, Paul Fraioli, anticipates that a lot of the work will be done in-house, and some of the work may have to be let out to a subcontractor. The first phase, which will come up with a plan that we can proceed on, is $3,100. There's a phase 4 also, which is basically meetings to meet with the board or such other meetings that you deem appropriate. So I think when we originally spoke about this, we anticipated a pilot cost of about $19,000 or $20,000. So I think we're going to bring it in under that. But this will be the first. So if we can have an authorization next week, Christina, for the manager to sign.
Are there any questions about the specifics of this? Anybody?
No, it used to be, it was one way, it's going to be two-way, and if it works out, it stays, and if it doesn't, it goes back to one way.
There you go.
Right.
Yeah, I have an amazing,
That cost us under $20,000.
that was very cheap.
Yes, thank you, Bob.
Yes.
Thank you, Rich.
Captain
Okay.
Obvious is here.
I guess I did have a couple of questions that I had asked when we first floated this a couple weeks ago. Lori Lee, I don't know if, do you remember I asked about because I hadn't seen this, this whole thing at the time, and could you just clarify for me, does it include any sort of, in the final thing, if we do it, there's going to be a crosswalk that's in a different location, there's going to be bump outs, is any of that being put in place during the pilot? Could you just
I mean, on the
clarify?
initial pilot, because it's a temporary, it's going to be done mostly with striping, and I think the sidewalk will be relocated at the Brander Street intersection. And the rest of it will be basically striped for the bump outs. And if you decide to go ahead with the permanent, then that'll be part of the permanent construction. The things like the islands, the landscaped plots, stuff like that will come in the final phase.
Yeah, I mean, just to follow up on that, I mean, I know we want to do striping and stuff like that, but I mean, there are sometimes, you know, in like if you get on Broadway in New York City, you know, they have planters and other things like that. That, I mean, I'd like to, I mean, obviously we got to do the striping and everything else, but it would be nice to have it aesthetically a little more interesting, and maybe have some physical structures there that, you know, obviously would create some guidance, you know.
During the
You can-
temporary period?
Yeah.
You can see that the Phase 1 has a dollar amount attached to it. The rest of it is to be determined, because the Phase 1 is really the pilot aspect of it, and that will all be temporary measures. And then based upon the success or the lack of success or the necessary revision to the plan, then they'll go on to, they'll evaluate it, and then will come those construction plans and the suggestions on the bump outs and the islands, and they'll be doing the evaluation of the turning radius and the fire trucks, and all of that stuff will happen after, you know, during the pilot evaluation, which will
So
be
you don't
phase
want
2.
the solid thing there until
Sure.
you've done all of that?
Right.
Right, we're
fair
gonna do
enough.
the
Fair enough.
fire truck parade.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Next week?
Okay, great. The next thing is two certiorari settlements that are on your agenda. These are matters that have been settled by the town of Ossining, but the properties happen to be in the village of Ossining. One of them is 26 South Highland Avenue, and it represents 6 years of assessment. So the amount of the refund on that is $15,553.80. The other one is Hudson 47 Realty, and that is 1 year of 1 year of assessment. So the total amount is $14,049.21.
Okay, we don't have a choice on any of that.
No.
No.
What's the total amount, Richard?
On those, about 29, 30,000.
Yeah. How are we from a budgetary perspective?
Yeah, we're fine, actually. We're very good.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
fine. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is Harbor Square. It's an update on the current status and some of the items that they've been working on.
What
Excuse me?
happened to poor
What-
Tom
I
Warren?
beg your pardon. Going back. Finance budget modifications, yes, Treasurer.
We like you
Come
now.
on. Yeah, we'll make Joe wait. We've been waiting for him for 12 years, so
Nice. Oh, man.
And I've been waiting for 12
That's
minutes.
usually my line.
sit with love, Joe.
So did, did you guys?
Hold on. Did we get that? Did we get those modifications on an email? Because I don't recall seeing that.
Do you have them in paper? I have a few paper copies.
I know you have it. You have it. I know you have it, but I don't think we got that in the email.
Well, why don't you go through them?
Well, that's
I
because he
mean,
didn't want you to see the jacuzzi he's putting in his office and
That sounds like Tom.
yeah, and the wet bar.
Yeah, I would like to. Well, I'm just going to share that with the mayor. Well, I have a few extra copies.
No, I was gonna give it back. It's just, I didn't have time.
Oh, here.
He has some extra copies here.
I'll take my back my emails.
These are all part of the year-end.
No, we're good.
Okay.
This is to satisfy.
Good evening,
the
Mayor
year-end
and
audit.
members of
That's
the
what you're
Yeah.
Board Trustees.
Hi, Tom.
We're getting ready for our audit that starts in about a week and a half, 2.5 weeks, I'm sorry. And so this is my first go-round with some year-end budget modifications. Some of these are some of the larger global issues. And then after we post these, then we can better evaluate how the departments did specifically with their budget. And part of the global issues are like, you know, the utility costs have always been a little bit hard to estimate. We didn't want to put too much money in the budget for utilities, and so, you know, they were unusually high, or they continue to be high in 2013 as well. So a lot of the utility accounts, especially heat, was overexpended, and if we can provide money from, you know, contingency, or like we had some surplus revenues to correct these, then it makes it a lot easier to evaluate how the departments really did with the rest of the budget that is under their direct control.
Okay.
And then I'll be back in 2 weeks with a couple of other wrap-up budget modifications, and also at that time, I think I'd like to talk to the board about possibly setting aside some general fund surplus monies into workers' comp reserves that our actuary has recommended, but we wanted to see how the village fared with regards to operating status for 2013 before we made any recommendations to the board. Item number 1, which is actually on pages, you know, described briefly on page 2, but it's actually the details on pages 3 through 6, is to appropriate our stop-loss insurance recovery revenues. Sometimes when our health insurance expenditures for particular individuals are very high and we exceed the stop-loss amount, then we get an insurance recovery back. So in a case like this, we need to appropriate those additional revenue amounts to help offset the additional expenditures in the general water and sewer funds. In the general fund is about $288,000 that's being appropriated. And even with that amount, and we're still receiving health insurance claims for 2013, so I'm going to come back in 2 weeks with a final amount to help balance the budget for health insurance. Item number 2 is for electricity expenditures. This is a case where the amount was about 10% higher than it had been for the 2012, and you know, I haven't had a chance to evaluate whether or not it's due to production or the delivery cost of the bill from the Power Authority, but for the general fund, I did need $37,230, which I'm asking the board if they would appropriate some of the FEMA Superstorm Sandy revenues that we had received. We'd actually received about $284,000 in FEMA monies, and we'd only utilized about $22,000 in the budget so far to pay for some of the park expenditures earlier this year that were as a result of the storm damages. So in this case, we'd be appropriating $37,230.
Okay.
Item number 3 is for heat expenditures, and that's a detail on pages 9 and 10.
You know, Tom, I just wanted to ask, and I implicitly trust your judgment and knowledge on this, but I'm not familiar with. We had money from FEMA,
Okay. Yes.
and we're applying it to an electric bill, but it was related.
Generally, with a storm such as FEMA, if you can match the revenues that we receive with the expenditures, in which case we actually did have a pretty good idea by the time the auditors showed up. We knew about how much we would receive from FEMA, and we wanted to make that budget modification in 2012 and accrue the revenues in 2012, but the auditors didn't believe that we'd get the money from FEMA anytime soon. So they made us record the revenue in 2013 when the money was actually received. And actually, we started receiving the money as early as May. So it came a lot sooner than what was anticipated. But in 2012, we were actually able to absorb all the expenditures within the operating budget. So when the monies come in 2013, it's like newfound monies for the village, since we'd already recorded the expenditures in 2012, except for those, the $22,000 in expenditures to repair some of the park damages that were actually made in 2013.
Thank you.
In terms of the electric, it's, you've ruled out the possibility that we're using a lot more.
That's a possibility as well. And certainly streetlights, I think, was the one line that I had looked at. And I was looking at how things compared 2013 to 2012 and the I'll take that back in the streetlights. I just haven't had a chance this year to try to evaluate what it was. All I know is that the accounts were overexpended, and I'm trying to address that. That's my top priority, to try to get ready for the auditors to have budget modifications in place to have a balanced budget.
Okay.
I'll be glad to report back to you.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that, I know that when we were looking over our priorities, one of the things we want to look at is energy use and things like that, Tom. So, obviously, we'd be very interested to find out what you've discovered, if it's something we're doing or not doing, or whether we're being overcharged. I'm not saying that's what's happening, but
Yep.
that's something that I think is really important. So I'm certainly very interested in what you do discover. When you have time. I know you've got a lot of work preparing for the auditors, and that's obviously very important. That audit report has a very important impact to the village. So we certainly want you focused on that.
Yeah,
So-
along those lines, when I was doing the vouchers this last time, I wrote down the NIPA bill was quite. This is my first time going through that part of the cycle. I was quite stunned. Our number one expense is Indian Brook Water Treatment Plant. That is a very busy place. I'm not surprised they have a lot of work to do. But streetlights is the number 2 expense, and it reminded me that I know Paul Fraioli had attended a conference last year that was put on by the Southern Westchester Energy Action Consortium related to streetlights, and there are some municipalities. Yonkers is the biggest one that's undertaken switching to LED, and the incredible amount of savings. It is an upfront investment, but they're paying it off so quickly the way they're estimating. You're nodding your head. You're familiar with what they're doing in Yonkers, and that's something that we may.
We've had, maybe 2 years ago, we had a demonstration of LED street lighting here. And we have a standing invitation to go up. There's a village somewhat up the Hudson to go up and take a look at what they've done. They've done the whole village. It's a village smaller than this, but it's still one in the downtown area, and we should go. We should take a look.
We should take a field trip, but we should also get somebody in to take a look at and tell us what it's going to cost us up front to make the changeover, and how long before we make it back, because this is clearly something we need to do. There should not be a light bulb anywhere here that isn't an energy efficient light bulb of one kind or another.
I think there aren't here.
Yeah, I
These
know.
are all energy efficient.
That's good.
Too bright,
But good. The street lights should be the most efficient as they can be. The technology is out there, and we need to embrace it. But that has nothing to do with this poor man's audit. So, what else we got?
But Richard, before we take any field trips, could you check with Paul and find out what he learned and could bring back to us that's already been looked at?
And I know that this is not part of you, Tom, but I guess can we try to figure it out? And I know last year was a harsh weather, and I think we still have some cold weather coming, sort of still. But then for the heat allowances for the operations center, I believe it was original budget, adjusted budget was less than $30,000.
Yeah, you know, I actually was going to talk about that next, and that was
Okay.
kind of a build off of Trustee Codman's
Yeah.
comments about things that I may learn, and I was going to talk about the heat next, and, you know, if you look at page 9, I am a little bit bothered by the high heat expenditure costs in the Rodriguez Operations Center, as well as the highway garage
Yeah.
that's up there as well. Those amounts are both substantially more
Than
the
what?
amounts in 2012
Correct.
and 2011, and part of that was we had reduced the expenditures or the appropriation for heat in the operations center because of the new boiler that was put in.
Yeah.
Was supposed to run more efficiently and help pay for the cost of the Power Authority loan, and that's clearly not the case here. So, you know, I did want
that amount.
Yeah,
right,
we should look at
I did want to talk to Andy about that and look at, you know, some of the controls up there, especially in regards to the Vita root system that's supposed to measure the tank level
Okay.
on a daily basis and such things such as that.
Dave?
Yeah,
Um,
and if this was energy efficiency upgrades that were paid for by the state through NIPA, then they should be concerned, because aren't we
You know,
benefiting? Isn't this a state program that we're benefiting from? And if it's not, I know on a residential level with Energize, if your home doesn't meet the level that it was promised that it would meet in the energy efficiency upgrade, then the state's very
Contractor
unhappy
doesn't get
about
paid.
that. Yeah, the contractor doesn't get paid, he has to
Contractor doesn't get
demonstrate.
paid,
So
so-
if it's actually worse, NIPA may want to
Well,
have some
actually,
input
when
here.
the Power Authority has been calling me because they want me to sign off on the work that was done, and I've been saying, well, I think that's something that Richard needs to do, and also, you know, that's why we had the resolution at the last board meeting for the village to accept the 2 projects and to authorize Richard to sign off to allow the repayments to start. But when they first gave me the final costs and such, I asked them if they could, you know, update the numbers for the payback and such, because, you know, they'd given us an estimate on the number of years that it would take to pay back based on whatever studies that they had done up front. And I was curious as to whether or not there was a follow-up calculation, and they said, no, sorry, we don't do that. So,
Well, I have to say that, you know, I don't want any money dispersed to NIPA until we understand what's going on there. I mean, I think all the members here would agree that there'll be no money dispersed until we understand the benefit that we're getting from this project.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
We just voted to disperse it, though.
no, we authorized Richard
Right,
to
we
do that.
Oh, okay.
And what I'm saying is, I want the consensus of the board to have Richard not do anything until we get a full report
I
and an
agree.
understanding of what's going on.
We all agree.
Yeah.
Okay,
Manny?
I'm sure, but I'm just,
Yeah.
you good with that, Manny?
Yeah, sure.
All right, Tom?
okay, so overall, in the general fund, I was looking for $90,000 to help balance the heat budget, and we actually had excess unexpended appropriations for gasoline and diesel fuel of about $18,000.
Oh, good.
Which I wanted to use to offset that. And I had mentioned the Power Authority loan. We had actually budgeted for repayment of that loan starting in 2013, but we hadn't started to pay anything back until the projects were totally complete. So I wanted to reallocate that $36,000 back to the heat account to pay for the heating expenses, and then that left about $36,000 that, again, I wanted to tap into the FEMA monies that we had received for Sandy to pay for the heat expenditures. I also had, number 4 was the WMOA dinner that the village was the host of, as well as some of the Harbor Fest expenditures that were not part of the Special Purpose Trust Fund that I wanted to take from the general fund, totaling about $12,000. Also, number 5, we'd actually received about $85,000 more in program revenues for the recreation program. I wanted to be conservative and only utilize $80,000 of that to help pay for some of the additional expenditures that were associated with those programs that generated the additional revenues.
Did we ever give WMOA the list of people from the village who attended that dinner? Because we do get a rebate from them.
Yeah, it's about, that's about $60. It's, yeah, it wasn't,
Total?
it's $5 per
Well,
head
weren't
for
there-
people that are not associated with the village.
All right,
You can still do it, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
$60 is $60.
Pay that heating bill in no time.
Could be $79.
No, it's probably like 80, but it's not.
Oh,
I
80,
just-
that's
I don't
better.
want- I just don't want you to think it's a huge number out
No,
there
it's
that
not.
we're gonna be getting.
Do you have
Okay,
any
back-
explanation on why the gas and diesel was $18,000 less than you had anticipated? I mean, I'm happy. I'm just wondering if you had a logical explanation. You had
I'm
more
going to
money.
have to have one of my staff members,
Okay.
we used to periodically, actually, and especially when the price of gas really started to escalate, we actually started to count the number of gallons and gave a report on gallons versus dollars over a period of time, and we'd have to update that list,
Okay.
which isn't hard
We
to do.
also have a significant number of new cars within the last 2 years, and they may be using a lot less gas than the previous ones.
Yes.
One can only hope.
That would be great. Then that means it's going to continue to be less than we expect, so.
What else you
Can I
got?
ask you, is it the same question for the heat for the recreation? I mean, that was another one that was selling out, was it not or not?
The heat work
Air
would
handlers
have been reflected by the, I don't know, we're not supposed to use the word, use the word air handlers. It's,
I just said it, so it's.
They did put a gas, heating system in there. They converted to gas at the rec center.
All I'm saying is, again, 13,000 is budgeted, 22,000, and it's higher than.
Well, actually, what happens there is that you'd have to look at the pool and the recreation line, 7140 and 7141. They just take the bill and split it half between the two. And, it's clear from the prior years, there actually looks like that there's about a $15,000 or maybe $10,000 savings in 2013 when you add the two accounts together. In prior years, I think the electricity bill was, I'm sorry, the natural gas bill was split in half, but they also had the heating oil for one of the sections, and that's why it wasn't exactly half. But this year, now that it's just natural gas, now it's being split 50-50.
So natural gas went up, but we don't have the diesel fuel, whatever it is, the heating oil. We're using more gas because we're not using heating oil.
Right, and we're using gas more efficiently than
Yes.
we're using.
But we're also suffering through very cold winters, so it may
That
be
too.
that we'll be using more than we did previously.
What else?
Cold in December, I think the rates will go
Yeah.
up.
And the rates will continue to go up.
Well,
Anything
January and
else you want to
February,
point
I
out
mean,
there,
look at
Tom?
those numbers.
Huh?
Can I
Keep
go on?
going, Tom.
Okay, number 6 is only a $503 adjustment, but it has to do with PEG monies, and that's a revenue that we get. We get about $40,000 under the old expired contract, and we've been budgeting $30,000, and any of the excess money has to be set aside in a reserve. And so we actually spent $30,503, so I need that $503 adjustment, please. And number 7 was a Section 8 housing fund. In this one, this is mostly just window dressing, and this is a case where the HUD voucher monies that we receive is pretty much offset by the voucher payments that we pay out, and we had made an estimate for 2013, and then because of the sequestration, the amount that we started to receive was reduced. So I was just asking if we could reduce the budget by $100,000 on both sides, mostly just to remove that unfavorable revenue variance that would show up in the financial statements. As I said, it's just window dressing. And then finally, the last couple of pages, I wanted to close the water garage roof repair capital project. That was a project that we had set aside $100,000 in 2011 without really having a firm basis for how much that repair would cost, and then because of the water damages, more work was needed, and so the project actually ended up costing $129,298. So I was asking for a transfer from the water fund contingency account to the capital project to allow that project to be closed.
Yep.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
Okay, great, thank you. The next item is back to Harbor Square, an update, Corporation Counsel Lori Lee Dixon.
I asked Joe from GDC to come this evening. There has been some additional activity and developments, and I also wanted you to have a up-to-the-minute discussion and information about the building permit and also the approvals at the county and how we're doing at the IDA and the next steps on moving the pilot forward. So I asked Joe.
Hit it, Joe.
Good evening, Mayor and trustees.
Evening.
Okay, so we'll hit the simple items first and quick. The building permit, as you know, has been submitted. The village has conducted and completed its third-party review. They've issued us comments. We've addressed all those comments. Resubmitted a fully revised set to the building department. I think it was as of yesterday. So now the building department is just checking to make sure that we have addressed all comments. So I feel that the building permit could be ready as soon as early next week for issuance. We have one small issue we're working with, and it sort of relates to the building permit. The plans were submitted to Westchester County Department of Health for the water and sewer approval, as well as the site plan review. The site plan review comments were fairly minor, as well as the water and sewer comments, which our engineers have addressed. We've prepared a resubmission to the Health Department. The larger issue we're dealing with the Health Department is to ensure that there's easements in place for the village to access any of the site utilities. So under our previously executed LADA and the filed easements agreements that are in place, those rights do exist, even though we, when we go through the subdivision process and amend or terminate or create any new easements required for the project at a future date, we'll be reviewing that easement agreement to make sure it's appropriate for the new project. So we're working through that. I think we do have sufficient evidence that underlying easements do exist for the benefit of the village. Moving on to IDA news, we have received documents from the IDA. As you know, we're all induced with the Westchester County IDA. The approval resolution, meeting and resolution, should be coming within the next week or two, I think around the 25th of March. The IDA has distributed the various documents associated for the project, primarily dealing with the mortgage tax issue and the sales tax issue, in the form of a company lease, a sublease, and a project agreement. So we're currently negotiating those agreements between the IDA, ourselves, and our lenders council. Quite to our surprise, though, and along the process, and I think village staff has also looked into this personally, the IDA does not draft, modify, or negotiate the pilot agreement. I was on a call myself today with IDA council, just to clarify, and I don't know if, Laura, you've heard any further dialogue from them, but we were on a call with them today, and they do provide a boilerplate pilot agreement, so which is the basic form, and it integrates how the IDA is a third party to the pilot agreement. So now this is something that we now take, and we'll have to work with, obviously, village staff here to tailor it, and whatever the nuances are specific for the Harbor Square project. And I just wanted to make everyone clear that there will be a subsequent pilot agreement coming out. That'll be basically a three-party agreement between the developer, the village, and the IDA. So we anticipate, we got the boilerplate agreement. We're doing our own tailoring right now in terms of fitting it to the Harbor Square project. And I believe Corporation Council will have a draft sometime tomorrow.
And you're fitting it to the resolution from last April.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's what he
the
means. He's tailoring it.
It's obviously specific to our program and the resolution that the board had passed last April regarding acknowledgement and furtherance of us and our IDA programs.
Yeah, I can just give a little bit of clarification. In some communities, they have their own IDA. In other words, Yonkers, for example, has an IDA of its own. And you go to that IDA, and the pilot is part of that process because Yonkers is the taxing jurisdiction there. It's a little different here because we have a county IDA. So there'll need to be this third-party agreement to memorialize that negotiated agreement that you were in support of last April. So I didn't want this to come as a surprise when the document arrived. I want to be able to be prepared to execute it when it is complete. So I was suggesting that Joe come in this evening and explain how we got to this place and why we were suddenly surprised, because counsel had mentioned, counsel for the IDA had mentioned it up to this point. So when I became aware that there would be this secondary document arriving, I wanted you to understand why that was the case. So this document will reflect your negotiated agreement from last April clearly, and he will be tailoring it, the attorney for the developer will be tailoring it as such, and will be providing it to me hopefully tomorrow, if not tomorrow, the next day. So in order to move forward, you'll need, because if you recall, we were specific last April that it was a resolution in support of their application to the IDA. Now you'll need to pass a follow-up resolution authorizing a signature on this three-party agreement that is arriving as a result of the approvals. The approval at the IDA will be the 25th of March, so that's at the point where the county is completed its process. So I wanted you to be ready to move. We are looking at doing a closing meeting in the next, I would say, 5 business days or so. We're exchanging documents and getting ready to go with executing the LATA, making sure the bonds are released from the old, bringing new bonds in. So there's a series and a timeline, and things have to be done in a particular order just for legal purposes. But I wanted to be ready to go with the pilot, the three-way agreement, when I was satisfied that it truly did reflect your resolution from last April. So that's why I asked Joe to be here.
So you think after that 25th meeting, we will have a period of 1 week, 3 weeks?
That is actually a good question. It isn't clear to me whether you need the three-party agreement prior to the approval resolution at the IDA.
Right now, my path is, and again, I keep pushing my closing with the lender because of the IDA and where the meetings are, because I need the closing with the IDA to effectuate the mortgage tax abatement.
Of course.
So all that has to happen. Now, I've suggested to the lender today, assuming we have all our documents in order and the IDA is satisfied with the project agreements and the sales tax related agreements, which does not really have anything further to do with the village, I'm trying to paper close the day after, which is on 3/26 and funded on 3/27, with the assumption that the pilot agreement is coming thereafter, after it's a post-closing requirement. So I've put this out to my lender right now just to buy us a moment here, because obviously it'll probably be a similar process to the LADA, where we'll work with Corporation Counsel and the IDA Council to culminate an agreement, circulate it to the board for review, probably go through another workshop, and then we'll see where comments are, what needs to be addressed. So I don't think this is something I can't rely on us sort of rushing in a minute's notice here. So right now I'm just awaiting on feedback from the lender, which I think they'll be favorable to, giving me that post-closing condition. However, they'll probably be very onerous. That if I don't deliver within a certain time after closing, it's an automatic default, and all rights, So I don't want to get into that situation either.
Your approval is 2 weeks from yesterday. Your IDA approval will be 2 weeks from yesterday. But next week is the legislative agenda. We can always add a resolution and convene on the evening of the 26th, since it will be a post-closing requirement for the pilot to be executed. And this will give us some time to, give me some time to be satisfied that the document reflects the understanding of all the parties. So it's possible that it doesn't mandate execution, it simply authorizes execution. So you can put it on next Wednesday, authorizing, pending my, review and consent that the agreement is reflective. Or you can wait and we can talk about it again at your work session on the 26th, and you can pass a resolution that evening if you convene into a regular meeting. So it's really at your...
To authorize signature subject to village board's final comments, to get the authorization issue out of the way might benefit me a little bit in terms of the lender giving me that.
Yeah,
I mean, feeling a little
I don't
safer.
see any reason to, I mean, if it's pending your final review, Lori Lee, then, you know, I don't see why we shouldn't just legislate it next week.
Because it is negotiated. You do have that resolution in place
You don't just do that.
from last April.
I have a couple of questions, actually.
Sure.
Joe, I guess I'm, this isn't Ginsburg's first time seeking a pilot for a development, is it? Or is it?
It's not, we're seeking several right now. We have several. So we have one in Haverstraw, we have one in Yonkers. Yonkers is already done, induced, and approved, now in documents. Haverstraw is induced. I'm not sure if they had the approval meeting yet. And here we're induced.
So is this
We're
your
in
first
approval.
time doing it in Westchester County, other than in Yonkers, which has their
I would say
own?
we own projects that have an underlying pilot structure or some sort thereof. Like we have a property in Mount Vernon that has a Mount Vernon IDA deal. But it is really,
I feel like this is another obstacle that is coming up and sort of getting in the way of us moving forward. And I would also ask, we voted on the intent to allow for this in April
Yep.
of last year,
Yep.
and then it went to all the other boards. Did all the other boards have an opportunity to again weigh
yeah,
in,
so I
or were they
think
be asked to?
there's been quite the show's going on the road, so to speak. So I think Andy, and I know several members of the board have also attended at times, from time to time. There's been attendance at the library board, at the school board, the town board. So this thing's kind of went around the circle.
Right.
As far as, and this gets more or less, I guess, into an authoritative issue, and we researched this along with IDA Council, being that we have a particular scenario here where we are in the realm of a village, the village becomes that authoritative body in allowing it, in authorizing the entering into the pilot agreement. So the village is actually the authority here. And it's not necessarily the IDA. The IDA in Westchester on a county level can't tell the village, per se, if it's going to let a developer into a pilot program. Because as Lori had mentioned, it's different in Yonkers and Mount Vernon, where the approval jurisdiction is the taxing jurisdiction, is the collector of taxes, is the school district, and it's all kind of the same bag. Now, as I understand it, Lori, we'll see more of this when we see the agreement tomorrow. In the boilerplate draft I'm been given to by the Westchester County IDA, which is similar to what they use in the county, and that's why it's just a boilerplate addressing their concerns. As I understand it, three-party agreement between the developer, village, and IDA, and all the other jurisdictions are noticed in accordance with the schedule. The schedule relates back to something that we had reviewed and had discussion on, and had the resolution. It was attached to the resolution back in April, this actual payment schedule of taxes. So I think what Lori's trying to say is a lot of the details have already been worked out and finalized. The hiccup or drop of the ball here was really who's just initiating, organizing, and moving the agreement forward, which we now know. And it's very unfortunate because this could have been done last summer,
really.
along with the LADA.
Yeah,
So it's really it's an unfortunate thing.
Right.
And,
Everyone was under the,
I don't like to come down and deliver unfortunate messages.
everyone was under the understanding that the IDA would be producing the documents, since they are one of the signatories. It's a three-party
Even
agreement.
our lender and borrower council.
Yeah,
everyone.
everyone was. And this came to about two days ago. In fact, we were working to see if we could encourage them to do it. I mean, even though they said, no, we're expecting you to do it, we said, well, you do these on a regular basis. It would be helpful if we provided you the terms. But now we have a standardized agreement, and we can certainly adapt it.
We're not recreating the wheel.
We're not.
It's not really an obstacle, it's
No.
just part of the long, long process.
Sure.
It's like the last act of the dialogues of the
Sure.
Carmelites,
Yeah.
where all of the
And-
nuns have been gathered up by the French Revolution and they're beheaded one at a time while singing the
Well,
Salve Regina.
I try not to think of it like that.
But
I try to.
But it's
try
just
to
our
think of-
waterfront dragging on is what it's
No, because the IDA does not. They had a waiting period. They indicated their intent to approve, and then they need to wait a period of time that's mandated. That waiting period is over on the 25th. That's their next meeting. So really, it isn't, we're waiting on them, and at the same time, now that we have this advance notice, 2 weeks advance notice, I can get the ducks in a row here, and we can all move, because it's a post-closing requirement, and the lender requires the IDA to have acted, then the lender will close, and then post-closing requirement.
just kind of, again, go back a little bit in time, I guess, today, kind of my topic. At one point, we needed the town board, school, and the library board to all kind of agree to sign off sort of on this pilot. Was that correct? Because a lot of people, I think that's the perception that a lot of people had. So they don't need we don't need the approval, or you don't need the approval to do this.
No, they were given an opportunity to
Presentation of comments.
to make a presentation of comments at the IDA. And one of the jurisdictions did make a presentation of comments at the IDA. And then the IDA chooses to move forward to address comments, to take a vote, either along the
Yes or
lines
no.
of the comments or to move forward with the project. So the IDA has indicated that their vote will be affirmative to move forward. So the three-party agreement, as Joe has explained, the village being, the location of the project and the main taxing authority. So
No, I just wanted to
along the
clarify that
way,
portion,
along the way, he took the show on the road and went to each of the meetings to explain the reasoning and the process. And then those entities were given the opportunity to appear at the hearing and to make comments.
It was true that for a while, everyone believed that it had to go
Correct.
to all four, but Corporation Counsel of the IDA interpreted the law as only we needed to approve, the others needed to be heard.
Right.
If they wanted to be.
Right,
Got
and
it.
to
They were
participate
heard.
in the process,
Yeah.
fully
Yes.
participate in the
They were
process.
heard, they were thanked for their comments.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Any other comments? or-
Anybody else?
The building permit should be, do you have an idea?
Couple days, and
Okay.
I think the building department is ahead of my health department issue right now.
Got
I'm
it.
trying to get this health department comfortable
Okay.
with the easement situation, and as Lori knows, that there's underlying easements on the property, so
And, yeah, and the
legally,
bill,
I have to get them comfortable.
and also the building permit won't be issued until the lat is
Until the
executed.
lat.
Yeah, and the checks have
Clear?
Right.
cleared and gone around the table,
Okay.
so.
So how soon can I make a dinner reservation for the?
You can have a sandwich truck down there, sure. You can start with that.
A hot dog truck.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Joe.
Thank you.
Okay, all set?
We'll
Thank
see
you.
you next week, at same time, same place.
Yeah. Well, I had a thought tonight. I don't know if it was more difficult to express this pilot debacle with either the board or Martin. And
So I will have a resolution ready, and it will appear on next week's agenda. Again, it's not mandating execution, it's authorizing, and I'd like to get the draft of that three-way pilot agreement out to you as soon as possible.
Okay.
I would certainly will, with my after comments, and it makes me happy.
You say you'll get it out to us as soon as possible, so we'll have an opportunity to look at it before next Wednesday. And if we have
Sure.
questions, to have you explain it to us
Absolutely.
before the
Yeah.
legislative session.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Okay, great. The last item on the agenda is turn it back to the mayor, trustee Village Board liaison reports.
Bob?
I know that Sam from the ambulance corps is recovering from the surgeries. I know that he lost an eye, and he's going to be having a lot of therapy, but he will get well. He will be back. It's the last that I've heard.
Good. Very glad to hear
And the
that.
ambulance corps is running and doing well. They continue to grow. They continue to service the village extraordinarily well. And that's it for me.
They had new volunteers.
Yes, they have more new volunteers. I just don't remember how many.
It was quite a number, I don't remember
Yeah.
either, but it was a surprisingly large number of volunteers in that short period of time.
Yes.
And then?
Yeah, I want to I wasn't able to be part of last Monday's meeting where I know our village manager went to the Chamber of Commerce, so I'm not sure if he would like to fill us in what happened in that meeting. Then I'll continue with my report. Please.
Oh, now, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so I had actually met with the chamber maybe a year ago, and just to tell them a little bit of what was going on. Well, I think Omar was there the other night. So, we had spoken. I like to go in there periodically to try to keep the relations going and good communication. So this particular time, I had the opportunity to basically share all the things that we've been doing over the last year and a half, and or a year, I should say. And I was going to say, And the event, even though they tried to get me to leave, the event actually went on for like an hour and a half. So I think, I'll speak for the chamber, I think they were pretty impressed by all the activity, and, a lot of it was a recap of, I basically summarized a lot of the things that the village had been working on, which was, summarizing about the bicentennial and all the activities there, and some of the economic activity that's going on in the village, some of the interested developers, and the discussion about the potential for Market Square, how the village is really interested in, as they review that process, and making sure they have really good public input and get the participation of everyone. So I really actually thought it was a very good meeting. I felt very good about it, so I hope they did as well. So that was basically.
Thank you, Richard, because one of the last meetings that I was able to be part of it, the chamber wanted to help the village in a lot of different ways. So I think that was a great opportunity to do that. So moving to another topic, I know our last work session we were talking about the overcrowding in some of the bylaws that Laura Lee is looking for us in different municipalities. So I had actually the opportunity to talk to people in Monkisco, the village of Monkisco, and I called the building department. I spoke to two people there, and I wasn't able to talk to the assistant building inspector who does the inspections because he wasn't there at that moment, but they were really happy of the way things go there with the application. So they said yes, definitely. Obviously there's a couple things she said. We mail these out every year, and sometimes we get that information, sometimes we don't, and that's what she said. We just have to keep going with that. There is, I'm not sure, I believe you did mention there is a $10 application fee every year for this. But overall, she said they were happy. This law was stated in 2001, if I recall, and it has been working so far so good for the village of Monkisco. I also called the village of Sleepy Hollow. I also called the building inspector's office there. I spoke to Patty, I believe, or Pat. I can't remember, but she was also very helpful in regards to the other bylaws, in regards to some of the laws that they had in there as well. So they say they like it. There's no complaints. There's nothing crazy that has happened to them. So pretty much overall, I didn't have the chance to call Brewster. But I think that's my next phone call during the week. Also, when I spoke to the Sleepy Hollow, they actually said in regards to the CO portion of this whole deal that we talked about. Every time that someone sells, exactly. So she said, when we did this, she said we looked at Peekskill. Right. I said we're doing that as well. So I told her, look, and Monkisco was almost 45 minutes on the phone with them. She was really helpful, or maybe like 30 minutes. But she was really helpful, so she welcomed me anytime or anybody that wants to find out. She said she was welcome to answer our questions. So that's pretty much my report, I guess, for that part.
Thank you. John?
Okay. We had the rec advisory meeting on Monday, and Henry's requested, he wants to make a presentation at the next work session if we have any room. The rec advisory committee is requesting that we redo the floor at the community center, the basketball floor. It's I don't think anything's been done to that floor in a really long time. And I think the idea would be to use, some of the rec fees to possibly pay for that. But he wanted to come in and make a presentation and talk about that. He has a particular vendor that has this flooring scheme that apparently would be very flexible. It would also create, multiple lines to do all the different activities that are there, including basketball, other things like that.
Cool.
But the rec advisory committee really would like to see this done because the floor is in pretty rough shape, and that's a room that has a great deal of use.
The other thing that the Rec Advisory is asking for too is we'd like to look at the bathrooms up at, I guess it's Veterans Park. But that's something else. I need to get a little bit more detail from Henry on that. But those were a couple of things that the Rec Advisory Committee was just talking about in terms of capital repair, capital improvement, ways we could. And I realize we've got a lot on our plate this year with the, with putting together the playgrounds and some of the other stuff that we're doing. But this was their ask, and so we'd like to do that for the next work session. The Waterfront Vision Committee has had a hard time meeting because of the weather, and so we haven't had a chance to meet. We would like to make a presentation to the board probably in April, and we're going to have another meeting probably later this month to discuss the presentation. I've been in touch with the fire chiefs on a regular basis, and the fire department's been going strong, doing well. New members, we keep bringing them in, which is great. And, that truck will be here any day. So that's my report.
Oh, thank you. Victoria? Actually, I forgot something else. I'm sorry. I was in a meeting yesterday. It was a pretty interesting meeting. The town regular meeting, and there were one of the biggest items, I guess, the last item was 17 and 20. Yes, and I'm sure a lot of people are aware of this. They say yes, but it was to a no. So says it was a long meeting, 25 pages. If anyone is interested, it's in the website. But a lot of people don't realize that actually it would have also affected, I guess, in a way to the town, but also to the village of Ossining, which we work together. We have a lot of combined services with the town in part of 17 and 20. And I think that would affect a great deal with what we have here in process with the village. So I'm very pleased and I'm very happy of what the town did. So I thank you for it. There was a lot of work. They worked really, really hard to this whole process. And it was very simple. Even though it was a lot of pages, it was very simple to understand the whole process that they did and what they did and how they did it. So thank you. Sorry, Victoria.
Before you go on, we should talk about 1720 a second. So essentially, for those folks at home who have not been up on this, the village of Briarcliff wanted to annex District 17 and 20 from the town outside into Briarcliff. 17 and 20, they comprise all of the commercial district in the town outside, and it would have resulted in a large loss of revenue to the town outside and would adversely affect the taxes of the people who live in the unincorporated area as well as to the village of Ossining, while not creating any substantial reduction in tax obligations for the people of Briarcliff. So the process is the village of Briarcliff board had to decide whether they wanted a referendum to annex, and they voted yes, they wanted to have that. The town, their board, voted no. So it could be over, or the next step would be if the village of Briarcliff decides to take it to federal court, and the court could decide to leave it like it is, or they could decide to ask for a referendum, in which case the people would vote.
It's the appellate division.
The appellate division of the state court. So that's what this is all about for people who didn't know.
The real danger for the village of Ossining is if 17 and 20 did move over to Briarcliff, and then Briarcliff decided to become a town village, that would take a huge amount of the tax money that goes into the town general funds out of play, and we would end up picking up most of the rest of the cost. Victoria.
Okay, thank you. And just for anybody who's watching at home, if it looked like Manny was sort of talking to someone, Kim Jeffrey, the town councilwoman, is here representing the town and so she can keep apprised of what's going on here in the village work sessions. Did that seem to cover everything, Kim, that we made sense of your what you've been working on? So there are a couple of committees that, or groups that I've just will update on. Through my role on the executive committee with ENWIAC, I also have the opportunity to be part of the steering committee that's trying to broaden the mission of ENWIAC, the Northern Westchester Energy Action Consortium, to include our southern sisters, the SWEAC, Southern Westchester Energy Action Consortium, as well as expand to other municipalities in the county, along the Sound Shore particularly. And the idea is with a larger group, then we will have greater opportunities for all of the people in our community for us to be able to bring back to the residents here to save money on programs like Energize or community choice aggregation, so we can lower our energy costs, for example, or deal with, have other opportunities in waste management, which is a big expense for municipalities. So, but if you think it's complicated to move through the bureaucracy of one municipality, trying to merge a nonprofit organization whose members are municipalities from across the country, you can imagine that every time we meet, which is every 2 weeks, there are new challenges to undertake. So it's an extremely interesting process, and I look forward to having some concrete updates at some point.
So you're almost done.
Not quite, not yet. We're working on that. I'll keep you posted. Also, this week was the CTC, the Communities That Cares meeting, and the topic was the results of last year's the polling that they do, the surveys that they do of students from 7th through 12th grade, and it's really fascinating information, and they have so much in-depth data on the behavior of adolescents in Ossining, and it's some really valuable information, and we get to see trends and compare how the substance abuse and risk factors behaviors of community members as well as parents and our perceptions. And what's especially interesting is often that the perceptions that we have of how many people are using, how many kids are drinking, or how many kids are smoking pot is usually very different than the reality. Last year, Communities That Care did a training for anybody who's attached to it that wanted to take it, that talked about community norms being the approach. So rather than scare tactics of don't do drugs because your brain will fry and you'll have a terrible life, which could be true, but it was based on the premise that pointing out to people that the reality is, do you know that 2/3 of OHS students don't drink, or 82% of teens in Ossining don't smoke pot? So that's our norm. We don't drink, we don't smoke pot. That's normal. Be like everybody else, because it's a lot easier to be like everybody else than to try and go against the norm. And that's just not often the perception of people who see other people drinking or maybe have experimented themselves. And so it's a powerful message that we've been driving home, and it seems to, in many ways, be effective. But I will give a shout out to a program next Tuesday, March 18th, 7 o'clock at OHS for both parents and students. Drive Safe, Drive Smart. And they really want people to come. There's a raffle. I'm sure this is really precious to someone. There's a raffle that will take place for students and parents. It will be your chance to win a student parking spot for the next school year.
Wow.
There's also credit hours for National Honor Society students, and students who attend will be given a phys ed class pass. I don't even know what that is, but I'm sure someone would be really happy to get it. So show up at OHS next Tuesday at 7 o'clock, and there'll be a motivational speaker who will be inspiring students to make healthy choices. So.
And while Victoria was at Communities That Care, I and 5 city mayors were addressing the Women's Council of Realtors. It was a really great experience. There were over 100 realtors there, and each of us talked about our wonderful municipalities. The realtors were very positive about Ossining. Some of them, there was one who used to live here, who doesn't live here anymore, but loves what she's seen in changes. There are people who've been selling things in Ossining. It was a very positive experience for all of us. The other mayors were from White Plains, Yonkers, who was represented by Development Commissioner, Mount Vernon, Peekskill, and New Rochelle. And I thought it was really great that they included the village of Ossining as if we were on a plane with them, and we are in many ways. This is a very urban downtown here, and even though we go all the way out to rural in some areas, it still is very much like some of those cities. Similar populations in some of those cities, similar expenses and difficulties. I'm going to put together the New York State government and Westchester Municipal Officials Association because the WMOA and NICOM, the New York Conference of Mayors, have been lobbying for several bills, which I've rattled off at great length at some of these previous meetings. But one of our bills, WMOA's bill, is being introduced, and that, Tom, you will like. It will allow the extension of the use of bans for 7 years. What is it? What's the limit now? 5? It's 5, and it will go up to 7 permanently. If this passes, and everyone thinks that it will, whether it passes in this term or in the next, it will pass. So that's a really good thing. The other good thing for us is that the Assembly has turned down the governor's approach to the tax cap and the really punishing tax loss of tax income, and therefore of our ability to provide the services that are so much needed and deserved by our taxpayers. Many Assembly people said that this is simply unworkable. There were elements of it that were bordering on crazy. For instance, having the county collect all the data from all of the taxing entities to make sure that we were all under 2%. And in the village of Ossining, we would have to deal with the schools, which rely on Yorktown, Newcastle, Briarcliff, the town outside, and the village being under the 2% or whatever cap that is. As you know, it's not really a 2% cap. It is the lower of 2% or consumer price index. And for this year, it's 1.6% is the base thing. So it's very difficult. So it is not really known how the Senate will act, but it does look like this is not going to pass in that way, and the Assembly is introducing its own budget, which is really a good thing. But dealing with that same issue, because every community in the state is affected by this budget, we are at WMOA is hosting on Thursday evening our usual monthly membership meeting. The deputy director of NICOM, Barbara Van Epps, to talk about the whole state's response to the governor. So I invite and encourage as many of you who can come to come. I think it's an important one for that. The other major combined effort is the Historic Sing Sing Prison Museum Committee and Historic Hudson River Towns. The Museum Committee had, in 2007, I believe, or 8, started a not-for-profit foundation to raise private money. That foundation no longer exists, and in order to raise private money, we need a not-for-profit. So Historic Hudson River Towns has picked up the ball and is running with it, and you will see that notice of the fundraiser on June 13th will go out, and it will be connected to the website of Historic Hudson River Towns. Now, why is this good? It's because Historic Hudson River, good for the Village of Ossining. Historic Hudson River Towns has been constantly, since we put up our interactive website, the first thing that comes out if you go Google for Hudson River Valley or Hudson River Tourism or Hudson, it is always at the top. And what does that mean? Well, here you've got Sing Sing in Ossining, in the Village of Ossining, on that website, as well as other websites. We hope to link to our website as well, where we do have an earlier version of the presentation of the museum. We need to update that, and there is a new one that could go up. So we are en route. We've got a $1 million seed money. We think that we will get a private amount for $100,000 in the near future. And we had a conference today with the head of the library at John Jay, with the possible, one of the issues was the possibility of John Jay running the museum. So it would be the New York City, or I guess it's CUNY SUNY universities actually being involved in the museum. There's so many other museums now have universities as their leaders. So these are all good things that are happening to all of us.
That's great news about the museum. I hope that there's more good news to come.
Okay, thank you. If we could have a brief executive session for the purpose of receiving legal advice and recommendation.
Do we have a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
So moved. Into executive session.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
This ends the televised portion of this evening's program or agenda. Have a good week. Please go back and look at the tape again to find out all of those things that I announced earlier, so that I don't have to announce them again. So have a great week.